Hi, welcome to Real Men Feel. This is Andy Grant, here as always with my friend, cohort, partner in crime, Appio Hunter.
Greetings.
Real Men Feel is something that we created earlier this year. It's about giving space to men to feel, hence the name. As a coach, as a transformational expert, as a personal growth junkie, a lot of events I go to, a lot of clients, predominantly women, and I was really called this year to make a space for guys to come out of the spiritual closet, to ask questions, to find answers, to just have a place to talk and share about whatever's going on for them. So that's the genesis of this weekly live blab. Joining us this week is grief coach Franklin Cook. Hello, Franklin.
Hi, how you doing, Andy?
Very good. And how are you today, Appio?
Real well. Having a fantastic day.
Cool. So Franklin, you bill yourself as a grief coach.
Yes, I do. I have several businesses that I run, and they're all a one-man show. And one of the most recent businesses that I started is a grief coaching business. And in brief, it's just me and a telephone line. And I use the principles of life coaching. I'm a certified professional coach, trained as a life coach, and peer grief support. So grief support where someone who is traumatically bereaved helps some, new people who are newly bereaved. So I use those principles and deliver on telephone support one-on-one to people, specifically to people who've lost someone to suicide.
All right. So, and I assume someone going into the grief business, for lack of a better term, has experienced some grief in their life.
Yeah. The peer support principles are actually one of my specialties. So I started doing this work about 1999 as a volunteer, and over the years I've developed a lot of expertise, training, helping to develop programs and guidelines for people who have lost a loved one to suicide, who help other people who've lost a loved one to suicide. So that's really my, the place where I come from most of all. And I started this one-on-one work because I no longer I used to do face-to-face support groups and a lot of face-to-face work. And I really miss that. I now do some work online, and I do the personal grief coaching. That's what I do.
Now, I'm kind of curious about your history, how you got started with this. Obviously,
Sure.
Peer-to-peer suggests that you had your personal experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, my story is that my dad died by suicide. My dad died in 1978, which was when I was 24 years old, and he was 49 years old. And after that, I really didn't work in suicide prevention or suicide grief support or really have anything to do with that world. But like I say, about 20 years later, I got involved as a volunteer, and very, very quickly, and by very quickly, I mean within a year's time or so, it really did turn into a second career for me. And so I've developed that career both around managing suicide prevention projects and around this other grief support element of my work. And I actually thought I was going to come on as maskmen.org, which is my prevention project. So if you ever want to talk, well, I can talk both personalities, even if I'm not, or there's maybe some other personalities you might be interested in as well.
We'll talk to all 12 of your personalities.
I'm open to, letting the committee take turns or however you guys need to do it.
Cool. One thing I want to ask about when you lost your dad, were you encouraged or allowed to really feel and express emotions then, or you kind of told to just hold it in, or how was that?
When I lost my dad, it was totally another world then, as far as, not just as far as being a man goes, but it was another world as far as stigma around suicide, stigma around mental illness. So I guess I would say that, it was a very difficult time, and I don't know if I was ever encouraged or discouraged. I went through a period of grief, I think, like a lot of people do, where you take your 3 days off, or I actually took a week or so because my dad had 2 funerals in 2 different places, and it was an intense time, and there was a lot of emotion right around when he died, and nobody could have held our grief back because it was so immense. But then I felt like, oh, I'm just going to go back to, I was a undergrad in Ogden, Utah, and I just went back to school like, okay, here we go. And that was hard. And
so you went to Weber State then?
I did go to, and I'm just impressed that anybody knows if I said I went to Utah, that Weber State is even a college.
That's where I am, funny enough. It's actually in Salt Lake and Sandy.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I grew up in Brigham City.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sure. So I went back to school, and I don't recall exactly because that's a long time ago, but I think I took 9 out of 12 hours incompletes. That, you know what I mean? I was just a chocolate mess, as we say, and I just never anticipated that sort of heavy experience, but it remained that way for a very long time.
So it was just kind of ignored. You weren't offered help. You didn't seek help. You just
I don't know if ignored is the right word, as much as I didn't have a clue, what I might do about it. So since I was already dealing with my life mostly through alcohol, drugs, and rock and roll, I pretty much stuck right with that. Which was also not that good of a decision, but that also, took me a while to get straightened out. But I wouldn't say so much that it was ignored, by others. I think people didn't understand about suicide loss, but really people didn't understand that much about grief. And outside of the family or people immediately affected, I didn't ever go get help or anything for my bereavement. I didn't really and I was I was a liberally educated person, but I didn't really seek help. Not for that.
So here's a question for you. I mean, knowing where you were when this whole thing went down and where you grew up, and understanding the very unique culture that exists here in Utah, I'm kind of curious to know, did that play a factor? The LDS element, if you will, because since you grew up here in Utah and you know what it's like, there is a lot of a shock element, particularly if there is suicide that's involved, and people almost like take a hands-off, a kid gloves approach, not wanting to offer support because there's that stigma regarding suicide, but simultaneously not knowing exactly how to handle it, and especially if you're being rebellious at the same time. Yeah. So how did that play into everything that you were going through? I think really, I don't know if I could make a generalization about the Utah culture, about the religious culture in that regard, but I do know that from the time my dad died, like the first funeral that he had in Brigham City, and we were not LDS, was a Lutheran funeral, but I can only remember like the first little bit of it because it was sort of like, I don't remember a thing that was said, but I know that it struck me as judgmental, or it struck me as things being cast in a negative way. And I sort of just quit, being there. And I just felt when we went back to Nebraska, and that's where he was buried and where my mom grew up, I just felt like the part where he killed himself was off the table. The part where he died of suicide was not discussed beyond that initial crisis when you can't get away from it, right? You can't get away from the fact that he killed himself in the first 72 hours or week or whatever. But once you got beyond that, it was like not a topic. Outside the family. It was certainly a topic outside the family, and we all struggled mightily with that. So, yeah. And then once I started getting help, I actually got help for the drug and alcohol addiction, and working with the grief even then was secondary to primarily I was trying to get clean. Right.
And so even though I worked a lot on my grief, it was always the background subject, and it wasn't until I had trouble 20 years later. It's like, and I was clean then. I was 9 years clean in 1999. It wasn't until I really had sort of
major depressive episode of my own, that I dug into the grief. And I was fortunate enough, and this is why I'm a peer advocate and a peer expert, and this is my life, is because I went to a peer support group, and it was like the best thing I ever did was to go be with people who had lost someone to suicide. That was just like, I can't even describe how I had done all of this personal work and all this psychological and emotional work, but this grief was always secondary. And once I made that grief primary, what I was really looking at, and I did it with people who had been there, and some of them had been there very, very recently. And that just made all the difference. That's how I wound up being who I am, is by going to that peer support.
Cool. And looking back, did the death of your father, did it exacerbate the drug and alcohol use? Did it ramp it up to a new level at that time, or?
I would like to have something to blame for however it went, but I have no way to know if it wouldn't have followed the same course. I'm one of those alcoholics or addicts who, from the first time I used, if somebody was around that knew what was going on, could have said, that looks like it might be a problem for you, and I was probably 13 years old. So I was on a trajectory from the time I was 13 until I first went to treatment. That who knows? I mean, it certainly didn't help anything. It was a very dark period. It was a very painful period. I was entirely traumatized by it. And, it certainly didn't improve the environment in which I was doing that. So I'm thinking my world turned very dark to me, in that I just really believed that, that's where I became, I don't like the word atheist because I don't think it describes anything, but that's the word that you would use, to describe where I went with all that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then in that initial peer support group that you were at, what was it a decent, a fairly balanced mix of men and women at that time?
This is the great thing, or the great topic about men. If you go to, I'm on the board of directors of an online group, Alliance of Hope. You can go to allianceofhope.org and see what that is. It's just a community bulletin board, but it's a very sophisticated one and very well monitored and moderated. I'll bet you 80 or 90% of those folks on there are women. Okay. If you go into any support group, like, you might luck out and go in somewhere where it's 30% men, but that would be a huge crowd of men in these places. That'd be if you went in there and there were 12 people and 4 of them were men, you go, oh man, there's a lot of guys here. Yeah. Because usually if you go in and there's 12 people, 1 or 2 and maybe 3, sorry, I'm adjusting myself there, are men. But really, this is to me, in terms of a real area for our culture, and by our culture I mean men's culture, to grow, is around grief. I mean, we pretty much, I don't like to make generalizations, because I've run into, literally hundreds of bereaved men who are really, sensitive people who've done the work and been on the journey. So I don't want to say we are this way or we are that way, but I'll tell you, our culture, men's culture, struggles with our grief experience a lot, I think.
Yeah. I don't know of any man that would argue that.
Yeah.
Or human being, let alone men. I don't think any.
Yeah. Well, I think to be sort of complete in what I'm saying, another thing, and this, to me, all of these men's issues are there's 2 sides to each one of these issues. So I can sit here and say, look, men do not grieve well, or whatever it is we're saying, that our culture isn't really sophisticated about that. But then on the other hand, people don't recognize and validate the way we do grieve. Like, sometimes we do grieve by working, we do grieve, our silence. People will just say, well, you've got to talk about it. Really? Some people have to talk about it, but some people don't. And this is just true. You know, so in a way, the other side of the story always to me is, well, do we honor the way in grieve? You know, and to me, our larger society or our larger culture doesn't honor a lot about men, you know, in different ways, and so it's always that, you know, we have these issues as a culture ourselves, and the culture we live in doesn't get us, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, real, you know, touchy-feely guys like me. You know, it doesn't get us.
Right.
You know, it gets the guys who are just like, you know, and again, I don't want to reduce people to a stereotype. I think that's part of the problem. But my father's culture or my grandfather's culture, I mean, there were some pretty straightforward things about what you did and didn't do, and who you were as a man, and what the rules were about your emotions. I mean, there's actually a lot of straightforward stuff about that. So I don't think we should ignore that either.
Yeah. And it's not about, I don't want to reinforce or use or judge stereotypes, but a lot of the stereotypes around being the traditional man are still reinforced by society and even rewarded, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what this is all about, like breaking those down and daring to push at those walls of the stereotype.
Yeah. No, that's what I appreciate about your work. As you know, I mean, we've only had one really in-depth discussion, but these are the kind of things, these are the kind of conversations, these are the kind of spaces where men are recreating their culture. Culture isn't a top-down project. You know, nobody's going to come in and create our culture for us.
A new culture's been built for men starting tomorrow. You know,
unless you're in North Korea, you know,
right.
I mean, that's how totalitarian it has to be for it to go culture deep, you know. And we need to do it from the bottom up. And I've learned a lot about the fact that that men are very, I mean, we are recreating our culture. There really is new masculinity, whatever that means, that I think is really vibrant, and that really maybe it'll be 100 years from now or whatever, but it's already so different than when I was born in 1954, and so the world I grew up in was totally Archie Bunker, you know. I mean, I see now I even make literary allusions that I have no idea if people even know what I'm talking about, you know. But it's like
we're aging ourselves here too, because we both understand what you're saying.
Archie Bunker.
I did my To Be a Man presentation last week, and I had the oldest I go. I started with a picture of John Wayne. Guy didn't know who that was.
I got nothing. Nothing for John Wayne, right?
Yep. Jeez, so it's kind of good. So we're, you know, are the oldest stereotypes falling away? You know.
Yeah. Well, and you know, that's a mixed bag, you know, of course. So, yeah. So I grew up in that era, and I'm so not living in that era. And the people that I associate with, or my colleagues or whatever, I mean, you know, we're modern. There's a modern species of us that is a different cat. You know, there's no question about that.
Cool. So with that, let's move on to what Mass Men.
Oh, sure.
is all about, right?
Yeah. Well, Mass Men. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
You'd hope, right?
I'm the project manager, so if I don't know, we are in a world of hurt, right? So Mass Men is strictly a Massachusetts endeavor, and where it came from is that, well, first of all, here's an interesting, just let's go outside of Massachusetts. Depending on which year the data are for, it's either 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 fatalities in the United States are men. Okay, you know, it's usually closer to 4 out of 5, even if it starts going down. So somewhere between, let's say, 75% and 80% of fatalities in the United States of suicide are men. Okay, so that seems interesting to start with. All right. So in Massachusetts, there was some surveillance that went on from regular public health surveillance from 2003 to 2010. They dug into it because the overall suicide rate in Massachusetts, which is very low comparatively, went up 2.2 per 100,000. It went from 6.6 to 8.8, or something in the sixes to something in the eights. 2.2 per 100,000. So on 6 or 7 million people, that's 150 fatalities a year, give or take. This fluctuates all over the place, so putting numbers on it can be a little tricky, but this caught the eye of public health folks. So they asked me to see if we could come up with some creative ideas to deal with that. And that's maybe a longer story, not to tell here, but the end product of that, or one of the end products of that, was developing a public awareness campaign that's built around a couple of websites that are just built specifically for men. And so that's what massmen.org is built for men. It connects men to kind of a innovative and somewhat controversial national site that was developed in Colorado called Man Therapy. And you can go to mantherapy.org, and it'll be an experience that you either love it or hate it, because it's one of those things, right? Mantherapy.org. And the other thing it does two other things. It takes men to mental health screenings online, and men tend to well, it's not that they like it, but they will do it. If you give them an anonymous, free online screening, it's something they'll interact with over their mental health. So we have 6 screenings, and then we just have a database of resources. So we're just getting rolling. We're a little past the start of our second year, but yeah, that's the basics of it. Mental health awareness campaign, Man Therapy, screenings, resources. So right now, that's where we're at with it.
Cool. And do you have interaction with other states as things succeed somewhere? Like, do things kind of spread that way at all?
Well, interestingly, Massachusetts is really doing a good job around this, because it's only been recently that the entire national suicide prevention movement has really started to turn and focus on the people who are dying the most, which is middle-aged men. And so we're kind of at the leading edge of, it's not that we're doing, all this work and everything. I don't mean that, but we're certainly in the fray. We are certainly, okay, this is a state, Massachusetts, that's really got something going on that's just for men, that is doing some community organizing around this, that is doing some public awareness around this. And so we are certainly we have a great Department of Public Health in Massachusetts, a great director of the suicide prevention program. Alan Homeland has done as much for suicide prevention in the state or in any state as anybody has done. So we've got great leadership. We've got 10 active regional coalitions. So we've got a bunch of stuff in Massachusetts to be really well. And we have one of the 3 lowest suicide rates too. Okay. But we still have, 500 or 550 fatalities a year, and it's all over the place year by year. So again, whenever you say numbers, people will go, well, it was only 472, or it was, wait a minute, it was 580, but that's how this works, is it's variable from year to year. So yeah, we just presented on Mass Men. My partner and I, Screening for Mental Health is the name of the organization, and people from the state coalition and someone from one of the regional coalitions just presented at the American Association of Suicidology conference. Because people are going, what are we going to do with us guys? How are we going to help guys who are in that kind of distress? And so I think that for the first, well, I don't know about for the first time, but really attention is going to be paid to men who are having the kind of struggles that lead to suicide, I think, like never before. And it might take 10 or 20 years for it to get full blown. But if things go the way we hope it goes, that's really going to get some attention. That idea that men maybe aren't getting what they need out of our mental health system. So that's a big idea. So
Well, certainly my own experience has been that there's such a stigma that culturally we have about getting mental health assistance for mental health issues,
Absolutely.
mental health challenges, and so that definitely plays a role. I'm kind of curious. I mean, have other states or cities even reached out to you or reached out to the state of Massachusetts because you are being so progressive on this particular front of addressing these suicide causalities?
Yeah, I think the answer is that the state of Massachusetts. It's not so much that people even have to reach out to us. The state of Massachusetts has leadership. Alan Homeland at the Department of Public Health, people like myself who I happen to be a project manager who works only in suicide prevention. But you have leading agencies here. These people participate in the national movement. Like when you go to the American Association of Suicidology conference every year, whether you're in Chicago or Los Angeles or where you are, there's a whole herd of us there. You know, so Massachusetts is part of the movement. And so like for instance, when the national strategy folks, it's called the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, looked at some of their special areas, there were two people from Massachusetts on the one that dealt with men, and it was Alan and me. You know, we have the person who is the executive director of screening for mental health. She was on the group that looked at workplace mental health issues so we're involved, not so much that people have to read, but we're part of the solution, and we certainly are part of the conversation. And you know, we have great partners across the country, so it's more that kind of thing.
It's really amazing that the fact that for many years more men die by suicide than women, but people haven't focused on serving them.
Yeah, that's because, well, I'm acting like I'm going to give a simple answer and that I know that I'm right. So let me not say that's because
it may be because
because then I'll sound like a guy who thinks he knows what he's talking about. Well, so there are several reasons for that. The one that I was going to mention first of all is that if white middle-aged men are the target population, it is hard to think of them as disenfranchised in some way. But we really are disenfranchised by the mental health world, all right? White middle-aged men really are disenfranchised. And again, I don't want to, by emphasizing white middle-aged men, I don't want to discount the fact that there are whole populations, young Native American men, young black men, others that are absolutely peaked out. But if you look at both numbers and rates, not just one or the other, white middle-aged men is who's dying. All right, that's really the case. So one issue is, how can we treat white middle-aged men as being needy when they're the most privileged people on the planet Earth, in America, right? I mean, it's just like, so that's part of it. But then the other part of it is just what we talked about, that male masculine, our culture does not, well, of course it promotes health. There's a whole bunch of us who are healthy, but it also promotes things like that one way to deal with your feelings is to have a drink, right? I mean, our culture really promotes that. Men's culture does. Our culture promotes competition, success. So if you're a failure, if you fail, then you're a failure. Our culture supports that, and that's just not even true, right? If you fail, it means you're a human being and you've lived long enough to try something. Because everyone who has had that experience has failed at something, right? but men's culture doesn't tell. And we could go on and on about all these things about men's culture that we love to help each other. But sometimes if I need to ask you, right, or if I need to appear weak or needy or that I don't know, then that's not going to get you anywhere, you know. So there are a whole bunch of things about men's culture that I would say, and this is, my opinion, I'm talking just purely my opinion here. There are a lot of things about men's culture that work against us. But just as we were talking before, okay, so you can look at that just like we looked at the beginning at, well, men are this way and that works against us. But then you have to look at the larger culture. And, you know, maybe we don't need to go sit one-on-one in a dimly lit room and spill our guts to somebody for 50 minutes. You know, maybe now that has actually helped me. So I'm not saying but everybody needs something different is what I'm saying. And in general, you know, maybe men need to go be a support group that goes down to Habitat for Humanity and makes a house together, you know, for their healing. Maybe that's what they need to do, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what, that's not a bad idea. Maybe we need to go sit shoulder to shoulder or stand shoulder to shoulder in a stream and fish, you know, with a fly rod. You know, these things, and it's not that women don't need those things too, but men need things to recover that I don't think our society is very savvy about.
Yeah. It's interesting you should bring up, because I read an article this morning that talks about how men, in order for them to even be open up, to avoid the perception of, you know, there's some kind of something romantic going on, and there's, mm-hmm. when they're sharing their feelings with other men, there has to be some kind of an experience involved, some kind of an interest or shared bonding thing that's going on for them to feel even safe to be able to open up in that particular regard. And certainly your perception about the cultural barriers that exist, those are things that Eddie and I have talked about, ourselves. And certainly we share that perception that we, you're not alone in believing that and thinking that there are way too many cultural barriers that are there and especially with the white middle-aged men. And I think that precisely because there's that perception of the privilege, the power, and everything else. I mean, the fear of literally having your career completely derailed just because you open up and say, you know what, I am dealing with major depression right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a very real fear.
It's so real that, okay, so in the world of studies about suicide grief, all right, there's not enough research there, but there's a couple things that we know for sure. And one thing that we know for sure is that stigma actually hurts people. You know what I mean? It actually keeps people from getting help. It actually slows their healing. Stigma is actually a real force in the world. And so when you start looking at what men might need, it is just like you point out. Look, any healing that goes on, I don't care whether it's physical healing or whether it's a man or a bug, you have to have an environment that supports that healing, or else it will not happen. That's all there is to it. So you have to have an environment that supports that healing. And so if you need to heal your psychological wounds, if you need to heal your emotional brokenness, if you need to heal, whatever is neurotic about you, or messed up about you, or wrong, like you've got the wrong idea about how to go about stuff, whether it's violence or whatever it is, well, somebody has to provide, you have to work with somebody who can provide an environment where you can do what you need to do to get that worked out. And that is a complicated thing too, so. And the same environment won't work for everybody.
Yeah. Right. The whole notion, men's culture just seems is such an act, and white middle class males, totally the privilege, that's the biggest act. So it's a huge risk to say, oh, that this is kind of an act, and I'm not feeling as privileged as I'm supposed to be, or whatever it might be, and that's the worst thing. And it's almost the notion of needing an activity. It's like men needed a distraction to then let their guard down. Like we have a shared activity, and now I can actually open up.
I love that you bring that up, because both of you touched on something which to me seems to be a theme that keeps surfacing, and that is men are exceptionally good at finding ways to avoid the feelings that we are taught that somehow are bad for us. That seems to be a common theme, right? We need to act, we need to find some kind of activity, we need to drink, we need to turn to something to avoid a head-on. Again, this is cultural conditioning.
Yeah, it's these are interesting ideas. I need to think about it a little bit. To me, to me, when we talk about men having an act or men avoiding, you know, in part, you think about it, and at its root is the idea of what either keeps me safe or gets me what I need. This is like really brain stem stuff here.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Brain stem.
Because we're literally to the animal part of the brain.
Exactly. And so when you think about the power of translating that level of the source of what's going on to your job, you know, it's like you're having flight or what is it?
Fight or flight.
Yeah. You're having flight or fight syndrome over your report being overdue. You know, it's like that can't be good for you. You know, and so you're going to avoid that happening. You know, you're going to when somebody says, if you're going to get punished, you know, for look, you're going to walk into your boss's office and you will have no problem saying, hey, look, I need to go see my cardiologist. You know, I'm suffering here. But you're not going to go in there to your boss's office and say, hey, I need to go to the psychiatrist today.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. You know, so again, you're going to go, hey, I'm okay, you know, or whatever. So I think that thing about that we're really responding to deep needs that our society is pretty, let's not, you know,
the cultural conditioning triggers that primal instinct of survival.
Whether you're a man or a woman, you know, modern society is a little miswired, you know, for all that.
And that's what we've talked about before, and it's more acceptable for women to do that, but to get out of your head, to drop down and feel. So if you're stuck in the old hardest lizard brain, you know, but because we're not faced with things that are going to destroy us, and really our life is not in danger, but the old wiring is still there.
Yeah. To my way of thinking, that is sort of the basis of some of these reactions that maybe just look neurotic or whatever, but it's really deep like that. And so again, so here's the thing. And I think that this is what's so encouraging to me, because look, we're having this talk just like this, you know, and if we were in private, we could probably talk about, you know, some stuff, and we would all benefit from it, and we would all feel safe in it. And nobody had to go do something. You didn't have to hire anybody or anything. And this is happening all over the place, you know, where men are going, you know, whatever it is, really, really sensitive stuff, whether it's about feeling like a failure, or whether it's about losing a relationship, or whether it's about their own sexual well-being, or men are having these conversations, I think, in a new way in a lot of places privately. And one of the things that I learned, we did a survey, this has been maybe 3 or 4 years or more ago. We did a survey of men who are bereaved by suicide, and one of the things I learned from it is that we asked our questions and had sort of that assumed stereotype, right? We were kind of asking questions around, does this happen to you because you don't go try to get help? That isn't what we said, but people were picking up on that. And I'll bet one of the comments we got the most was, you're stereotyping us. We aren't Archie Bunker. You know, we're a whole new breed, and I can talk about my feelings. And so I just think that when I got that pushback, I wasn't as focused on working directly with men's suicide prevention as I am now. But to me, that was the beginning of sort of my return to looking at masculinity as something that I'm personally like back in the day, back in the 70s, you know, I read Iron John, and again, I don't know if everybody's going Iron John. I better Google that, but you know, but back in the day, Robert Bly and Sam Keane and others were we're doing work around this, and at least I had an intellectual interest in. I never went out into the woods and beat a drum or anything, but I am willing to. So yeah, I think there is a renaissance of that somewhere, because I keep bumping into it now that I'm in this men's suicide prevention thing. And so Mass Men, we're gonna go to Men and Boys Health Summit in June, and that's people like we're talking about here. They're around, and I'm learning about it, and I think that there is something going on.
Cool. Well, I do know at some point Real Men Feel will have a live weekend, a live event, so we'll get you in the woods drumming. How about that?
Sure.
That's what makes me feel most alive is being willing to have a new experience.
Yeah,
right?
I'm down with it.
Yeah.
I'm down with it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I will not sing probably, but
don't rule anything out. Well, we've been going for like 40 minutes. I just want to acknowledge that, and we love to have you back and just talk men's culture. I feel like this could go on for a long time.
Yeah,
that's for sure. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to meet you, Appio. Really, really a pleasure, and especially to know that you're in northern Utah.
Yeah.
I still have 2 kids there and 8 grandchildren, so I go there from time to time.
Awesome.
And, so we'll see what develops, but certainly, Andy, I appreciate your work, and I think that people who are willing to go out and pioneer, some of these things like men's groups and men's conversations. I mean, this is what's gonna make a difference for us. So I'm very grateful to you and to both of you for this opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, glad we found each other. And just to recap, can learn about at massmen.org.
Yep.
And what's your personal site?
It's actually personalgriefcoach.com.
Personalgriefcoach.com. Awesome. And guys or women, we have ladies in our Facebook group as well. We have a private Facebook group called Real Men Feel to keep the discussion ongoing between shows. You can talk about the show, tell us what you didn't like, what you like, what you want to see next. Anything goes. It's a place to share and to comment. And speaking of men's groups, I actually lead a men's group here in Massachusetts. Meets the 3rd Thursday of each month up in Andover, Massachusetts, at a place called Circles of Wisdom. And this Friday the 13th, I'm leading my To Be Man workshop. So if you're brave enough to come face your manly superstitions, that's happening in Acton, Massachusetts. And you can check that out at my site, navitascoach.com. And we're actually taking a break. Real Men Feel will not be live next week. We're going to take a little short break, but we'll be back in 2 weeks on the 24th of May. And we're going to be busting some relationship stereotypes with author and coach Jeff Lofton. And I believe he's from Colorado. So everyone's coming from out west. There's all these connections to you, Appio.
I'm telling you, there's something about these mountains out here that just kind of like really create that deep, personality and ways of thinking.
Cool.
But then look where they all end up. They end up in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Looking to heal and feel out here. I don't know.
Right.
Oh, wait, they attracted to our low suicide rate. We don't have that in our tourism brochures, I don't think.
Yeah.
I just want to let you know that Real Men Feel, all of our past episodes can now be found on iTunes as well. Just search in the iTunes store for Real Men Feel, and you'll find us there.
SoundCloud as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Are we here?
Yep, SoundCloud. Yeah, we're everywhere. We're on YouTube.
Yeah.
You just spend all day searching Google for Real Men Feel and read and watch and view whatever shows up. Right?
Yeah, you'll find us.
Soon we'll have bobblehead dolls. I don't know.
Yeah. That or a bobblehead doll of my dog. I don't know if I'll do one of me.
All right. Thanks again, Franklin. Thank you, Appio. Thanks for everyone checking us out today, and be well.
All right.
Thank you.
See you guys.